Johnny Carson revealed the 9 old country music stars who were actually evil. He never needed pyrotechnics to light up late night. A raised eyebrow, a half smile, a perfectly timed pause. That was Johnny Carson's electricity. For 3 decades, he invited America's music royalty onto his stage, then tried to guide the conversation down a clean little hallway where people at home could laugh, sigh, and drift off, feeling like the world made sense. But some nights the hallway narrowed. Some nights the timing broke, the smiles strained, and the band stared at the floor while the applause sign begged to be believed. Those nights usually featured a country legend in a big hat, a bigger story, and a mood that didn't care what the red light wanted. This is what those nights felt like, up close, unvarnished, and paced exactly the way the clock on the wall refused to be. It starts with Johnny Cash because calm meets gravity and realizes it brought a water pistol to a thunderstorm. Cash walked out like a church bell in boots, steady, solemn, perfectly aware of the halo the audience tried to hang on his shoulders. Carson loved that stillness. It made jokes land harder. But stillness can turn to concrete if the questions come in sideways. Cash didn't filibuster, didn't dodge, he simply didn't rush. A straightforward question could stretch into a minute of carefully shaped silence, and you could hear the band's horns cooling while he found exactly the right word. Carson would try a soft nudge, blink twice, and let the quiet do its strange kind of tap dance. Then Cash would drop a single sentence that sounded like it had taken a lifetime to earn. The audience leaned forward. The cough in the 3rd row disappeared, and if the segment timer shook its head, well, that was a problem for the next commercial. Tension, not anger. Tension like you get when the river runs deep and you know you only rented a rowboat. But the show breathed easier after the break, and Carson's desk, which had seen 1,000 nervous hands, looked almost relieved to be touched again. If Cash was a canyon, Dolly Parton was a fireworks warehouse that learned to wink. She arrived glowing, talking fast enough to outpace the clock, and charming enough to make the clock blush about it. Carson leaned into it because how could you not? But managing Dolly on live television is like trying to pour champagne into a thimble without losing the fizz. She radiated punchlines, then pivoted to sincerity so quickly you could hear the studio swivel. The tension wasn't conflict, it was overflow. When a guest has heat, late night gets greedy. Can you stay funny and still tell a real story? Can you turn a personal moment without letting it get heavy? Can you land the button before the band plays you off? Carson would toss a gentle tease and Dolly would top it like a gymnast sticking a landing on a moving train. And then, right when it felt like the balloon might drift, she did the rarest thing, she listened. She gave the host space. She gave the show rhythm. Tension gone. Hands unclenched. Viewers at home smiled at the set like it was their living room couch, and maybe, for a second, it was. Willie Nelson brought a different weather system, something low, warm, and stubbornly independent. The man's timing on a song lives a little left of the bar line, and conversation with Willie can do the same. Carson respected that. He'd try to guide Willie through a tidy arc, setup, story, tag. But Willie doesn't click into an arc. He enters a drift, points at a horizon only he can see, and somehow lands on a detail so specific you realize you've been on the right road the whole time. The crew loved him. He treated every person like they were the only one in the room. The challenge was tempo. Late night is a metronome wearing a tuxedo. Willie is a porch swing at 2 a.m. You can't force a porch swing to sprint. So Carson learned to loosen the reins, to let the laugh breathe longer, to allow a joke to arrive on Willie's standard time and still score. Any backstage edge came from logistics, tight day, tighter flight, a wardrobe that needed 5 minutes the clock did not possess. But once he sat, once he smiled that easy, wry, mischievous smile, the whole studio unclasped its jaw. The red light loved him even when the rundown didn't. Waylon Jennings didn't care about rundown, he cared about truth, which is poorly housebroken and knocks over furniture when you invite it on camera. Waylon's presence had a voltage. Not aggressive exactly, but refusing to bow to format. Carson could handle that. He made a career out of riding energy like a wave and stepping off without getting his suit wet. Still, Waylon had a way of ignoring guardrails. If a question felt soft, he stiff-armed it. If a story wanted sand in its gears, he poured in a cup. The band sat taller when Waylon walked in. Not every guest makes musicians sharpen their ears. Some nights the sparks were fun, Carson's sly grin against Waylon's dry knives. Some nights the sparks felt a little too real for midnight. You could feel the room choose. Do we lean back or lean in? They leaned in, of course. That's why you watch live TV. Not for the polish, for the possibility. Merle Haggard brought the ache. Not a sad mood exactly. More like the thrum of a life that refused to fit inside small talk. Carson, who could float through celebrity chatter with Olympic grace, adjusted. He asked questions that let Merle be plain. Complexity hides easily inside plain words when the person speaking them has lived in the deep end and come back with his pockets full of salt. Tension leaked in at the edges when the show needed light, and Merle delivered true. You can cut true, you can't fake light. Carson knew the difference. He'd smile, toss a smaller question, find a joke with a soft landing, then bring the mood back up without stripping the soul out of the moment. That's the art, not the pun, the rescue. If Merle mentioned nights that ran too long or crowds that demanded a version of him he didn't always have, Carson gave him room, let the audience feel the cost of applause, then tossed to break with a line that honored the weight but carried the show. The clock exhaled when the band kicked in. The audience did too. Tammy Wynette taught the set how to hold itself together even when the story wanted to split at the seams. She could float above the pain like a swan that refuses to show the work happening under the water. Carson's questions tested the balance between honoring the music and poking the private places where the music was born. He never pressed for gossip. He pressed for the truth that turns gossip into lesson. Tammy answered with grace, and grace can be misread as easy. It isn't. It is control learned the hard way. The tension came from the tilt. How close to the bone can a conversation go before it stops being television and starts being a kitchen table? Carson had a sixth sense for the line. He backed off at the right time, made a joke with a warm edge instead of a sharp one, and let Tammy leave the couch taller than she arrived. The audience felt that, even if they couldn't name it. They applauded not just for the songs they knew, but for the composure it takes to sing them. George Jones brought unpredictability, but not the kind that sets off alarms. More like the unpredictability of a river that once flooded the town and now looks peaceful, which makes you stare at the clouds without realizing you're doing it. He could be hysterically funny in an offhand way, the sort of humor that doesn't announce itself, it just sits there and dares you not to laugh. The show loved those moments. What it feared, just a little, was the possibility that a story might wander into territory the clock didn't want to visit. Johnny kept the lane gentle. He asked about craft, about touring, about the odd things fame does to ordinary errands. George would nod, grin, slip in a line so dry it squeaked, and the studio would crack up like they'd been saving the laugh for years. If the segment's edges frayed, Carson tidied them with the skill of a man who could thread a needle on a roller coaster. The desk lamp shone a little warmer after George left. The floor felt like it had been told a secret by someone who didn't mean to tell it but is glad you heard. Loretta Lynn was dynamite in a dress sewn out of respect. She didn't have to amp anything up. Reality has a way of making fiction look lazy when Loretta tells it. Carson knew he had to be quick with her, and he loved that. You can see it in the micro smiles between questions, in the way he set up an alley-oop and let her dunk with a story about a stage, a bus, a promoter who underestimated her, or a small town that didn't stay small after Saturday night. Any tension you felt was the good kind, the kind that turns into household catchphrases the next morning. Loretta carried her own gravity, so the show didn't need to weigh her down with backstory. She'd bring up a truth about marriage, about money, about the music business's mirror tricks, and Carson would gently toss her the kind of prompt that lets a legend spin a larger lesson out of a tiny thread. It's not an argument. It's a dance. And the cameras love that more than fireworks. Glenn Campbell had a smile that could talk a tightrope into relaxing. But tightropes don't listen, and neither does live television when it smells the slightest uncertainty in the air. Glenn's gift was making skill look sunny. Underneath the shine, the man was all muscle. Studio muscle, show muscle. The kind you only get by surviving nights when the voice wants to take a taxi home without you. Carson adored that professionalism. He built a career on it. The tension was the mirror image of Merle's. Could light carry weight without cracking? Glenn could tell a story that made the audience laugh, then let a little shadow cross the sentence like a cloud passing over a field. People felt it without knowing why. Carson's follow-ups were delicate, supportive, curious, never fishing. If a hint of darker weather slipped in, he steered the segment back toward craft. Arrangement choices, guitar necks, tour chaos, the tricks a veteran uses to keep a song honest when the road isn't. The band grinned when he picked, because musicians know. They always know. 9 guests, 9 different temperatures for the same room. And through all of it, Carson worked the intangible levers: timing, tone, laughter pressure, the space between a question mark and a smile. That's the part no clip show can teach you, the invisible management. The way he would lean forward a half-inch to show a guest he was with them. The way he'd call the band by name to make a moment feel like family after a sentence landed heavy. The way he held silence long enough to be respectful, but not so long that the studio audience decided to break it with a cough. He looked effortless because effort had been baked into him by years of practice the public never saw. And when a country star sat on the couch, he changed his tuning just a little. More story, less spin, more room for the human mess inside a polished hit. Backstage, the tension people loved to imagine rarely involved screaming. It involved clocks, schedules that don't care about human adrenaline, a guest who just came from a photo shoot that ran long, a producer trying to unlock a dressing room door without rattling it, a wardrobe rack that developed an attitude. Someone lost a boot. Someone else found a detail that needed to be shared and suddenly realized it might not be shareable. The show keeps rolling anyway because late night is a train with one job: don't stop. You can feel that hum on the stage floor. Everyone learns its key. Some guests sing along. Some tap their foot off beat and dare the train to follow. Country artists, maybe more than most, brought the merciless honesty of the road onto a stage designed for controlled charm. The friction made better television than anyone planned. And what about the moments people still whisper about? The little jolts that never quite faded. There were jokes that hit harder than expected and hung in the air like they were daring someone to swat them. There were answers so blunt you could hear a muffled gasp in the balcony. There were smiles that meant, "We'll cut that out," and other smiles that meant, "Absolutely not, that stays." If substance talk surfaced, it did so with euphemism and a wink, the way a grown-up world translates itself for a living room audience. People may have traded wild stories in green rooms in those days, but on the carpet in front of America, the language wore a suit and combed its hair. If a rumor tried to elbow its way in with a mention of tour nights that ran too long, or someone who had a history with a little too much bottle or a backstage taste for cannabis, Carson steered carefully. Let a detail live if it helped the story. Cut it if it felt like harm pretending to be honesty. That kind of editing happens at the speed of breath. What made the tense nights watchable instead of brittle was respect. Carson respected the road. He respected the cost of standing under hot lights and telling the truth about a song when your personal life would rather you didn't. He respected that not every grin wants to be interrogated, that sometimes the best question is the one you don't ask, and that the most powerful thing a host can do is protect the guest from the part of themselves that wants to overshare just to please a crowd. Country artists who stepped into that protection tended to relax. The couch got softer, the desk got friendlier. The laughter loosened like a tie at midnight. The audience at home felt safe enough to enjoy the ride. And then there were the nights that turned into small legends because the chemistry simply refused to behave. A guest arrived more guarded than expected, or more playful, or more restless. The show tried to slide into its usual rhythm and found itself drumming on the table instead. When that happened, Carson resorted to the old magic. The comeback line that sounds spontaneous because it is, the eyebrow that apologizes without saying sorry, the perfectly placed pivot that moves us from a sentence that landed heavy into a bit that keeps the evening intact. That's not trickery, that's craft. And craft is why you can still watch those clips decades later and feel like the jokes understand something about you. If you're looking for villains, you'll miss the point and the pleasure. The real story is how live television keeps both hands on the wheel while real people, complicated, dazzling, bone-tired, hilarious, tender, and a little dangerous in the best artistic way, try to be both themselves and their myth in front of millions. Johnny Carson learned how to move that myth around like furniture so the person had room to breathe. With Cash, it was silence. With Dolly, it was sparkle that knew how to land. With Willie, it was patience. With Waylon, it was a grip strong enough to hold a straight line. With Merle, it was mercy. With Tammy, it was dignity. With George, it was the permission to be sly without apology. With Loretta, it was the joy of a truth well told. With Glenn, it was the sunshine that lets a heavy sky admit it's there. And the red light? It learned something too. It learned that a show is only as good as the tension it can survive. Not the cheap tension of manufactured scandal, but the elegant tension of unscripted humanity meeting a format built for charm. You watch late night for the laugh, yes, but you remember it for the heartbeat you hear under the laugh when a legend pauses, glances at the band, and decides whether to give you a little more than they planned. The nights we've just walked through were full of those heartbeats. That's why they live rent-free in clips and memories. Because the risk was real, the kindness was real, and the artistry required to keep everything upright was as invisible as it was enormous. Carson used to close the show with a rhythm you could set your breathing to. Even when a segment ran long or a story decided to take the scenic route, he found the path back to gratitude. Gratitude for the guest, for the band, for the people who answered phones and hauled cables and typed cue cards that got flipped too slowly or too fast. Gratitude for the audience that laughed in the right places and the wrong ones. And gratitude for the strange privilege of being the place where the road meets the living room. Country music understands that better than most. It knows that a chorus you can sing in your kitchen can also fill an arena. It knows that pain makes jokes funnier and that jokes make pain survivable. It knows that grace can feel like luck and that luck is often just practice in high heels. So yes, there were tense nights. There were timing scuffles and vibe misfires and moments when the truth arrived with its suitcase and refused to leave before the credits. There were smiles that doubled as smoke detectors and laughs that wore armor, but the show kept its promise. Come here and be who you are, and we'll meet you with enough care to make sure the country can handle it. That promise made the tough nights not just watchable but essential. They weren't detours, they were the map. If you've ever wondered why those episodes still feel alive, it's because they were built on the only thing that never goes stale: watching smart, gifted people find their footing in real time. Johnny Carson knew how to give them the stage and the safety net. The country stars knew how to dance with both. And somewhere between the first laugh and the last applause, America learned how to hold the weight of a complicated story while still going to bed smiling. If you want more of these behind-the-couch deep dives, the kind that peel back the polish without turning real people into cartoons, stick around. The next one traces the whispers, the rewrites, and the red pen edits that turned a chaotic rehearsal into the most unexpectedly perfect duet of the decade. You won't believe who almost walked, who almost cried, and who saved the night with a single line spoken so softly, the microphones barely caught it. Stay tuned.